All right, let's jump right in. Today's explainer takes a look at Give Me Credit, the ethics of the algorithm. We're pulling from some fascinating discussions featuring ethics professor Neil Tift, along with John Mackey and J.S. Whaldo from Give Me Credit. We're going to explore that invisible architecture behind credit behavior, that massive shift from actual human judgment to cold algorithmic decision-making. Let's get into it.
So we're jumping right into the deep end here because when it comes to the credit system, most of us are being managed by a complex structure we barely even understand. I mean, think about it. The hosts bring up this massive transparency issue right off the bat. Most people literally have no idea how credit scores actually work. Yet these totally opaque numbers dictate where you can live, what you pay for basic services, and what opportunities you get. So the big question is it actually fair to hold everyday people responsible for navigating rules that were never clearly explained to them?
And that brings us to this incredible quote from Neil Tift: "Fairness depends on power." He just immediately shatters this illusion that algorithms are inherently objective or fair, right? He points out that fairness completely depends on the staggering power imbalance between massive corporations and individual consumers. If you ask a huge corporation what's fair, well, they'll probably point to their bottom line and their shareholders. But if you ask a working family what's fair, they're looking at the very real threat of losing their home. When one side holds literally all the cards, the system defaults to favoring the powerful, which sets up this severe conflict. On one side, you've got an automated system built by engineers who have zero personal connection to the people being impacted. It operates in pure ones and zeros, yes or no, up or down. It expects perfect, unbroken stability. But then you have real life, and real life is chaotic. It includes sudden job losses, surprise medical bills, widespread instability. So we end up with this rigid, unbending algorithm trying to measure a completely unpredictable world, totally disconnected from the messy reality of the actual human beings it's scoring. Now, you might hear critics say, well, if you don't like the system, just don't use credit. But let's be real. Opting out is a complete illusion. The second you try to step away from the credit system, you are immediately locked out of basic necessities. Good luck renting an apartment or borrowing money for a car to get to work, or even setting up your utilities. Participating in this data-driven system isn't a free choice at all. It's an intense financial pressure where playing the game is essentially mandatory for survival today. So Neil Tift argues we desperately need a turning point. He calls for capitalism with a conscience. And to be clear, he isn't talking about blanket debt forgiveness or telling people to just stop paying their bills. Consumers do have obligations, absolutely. But he's asking how we can build systems that actually allow for human flexibility. We have to stop relying purely on shareholder bottom lines, where laying off thousands of people is somehow seen as a win for the stock price, and start building some level of understanding into these structures so they don't instantly punish people for circumstances totally out of their control. And this highlights a massive gap between what is legally permissible and what is actually ethical. As Neil points out, the law is just the floor. It's the absolute bare minimum of what society allows. But just because a financial practice is legal, like, say, buying and selling medical debt for massive profit, that absolutely doesn't make it ethical. Ethics sit way high above that legal floor, shaped by our culture and our moral compass. The problem? Our algorithmic systems are strictly programmed for the legal floor, and they completely ignore the ethical standard above it. To figure out how we might actually inject a conscience into these rigid algorithms, we really have to look at what shapes human behavior in the first place. Neil breaks this down into 3 distinct tiers of ethics. First, you have professional codes, like the strict ethical guidelines a therapist might follow. Second, there are organizational codes, which are the values dictated by the company you work for. And finally, personal codes, your own deeply held moral compass. The real challenge we face today is figuring out which of these codes, if any, are guiding the engineers building these credit algorithms and the agencies enforcing them. These ethical codes ultimately feed into Neil's step-by-step approach to ethical problem solving. This is a very left-brain, logical way to handle complex situations. First, you gather every fact. Then you look at all the available alternatives. Next, you measure the consequences of each one. And crucially, you evaluate how this impacts all stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but consumers, employees, the whole community. Every decision sets a precedent for the future. It's a rigorous process of accountability that automated credit systems completely bypass. To really drive home what algorithms lack, Neil uses this great, everyday example of driving on a busy freeway. When you see someone with their blinker on trying to merge, you might slow down and wave them in. You do this because of human empathy and what Neil calls self-talk. You assess the situation, you tap into your conscience, and you choose to be accommodating. A corporate algorithm? It doesn't have self-talk. It's just cold ones and zeros. It has absolutely no filter for conscience, meaning it cannot choose to let you merge when life gets suddenly crowded. Now, to highlight just how unpredictable human behavior really is, there is this hilarious anecdote from the source material. Back in the day, host John Mackey actually lived in a shared house with Neil and Neil's son, Zach. Well, Zach and Neil loved to bake desserts, and John loved to come home from work and secretly eat them. It turned into this running battle where Neil and Zach had to start hiding their homemade treats in increasingly obscure places all over the house just to keep John away from them. So get this, Neil and Zach made a special batch of frosted brownies and thought they found the absolute perfect hiding spot, inside a closed dryer, down in the basement. I mean, who eats the center of a brownie hidden in a dryer? Well, John Mackey still managed to find them. And worse, he didn't even use a spoon. He used his fingers to dig out and eat the entire gooey center of the frosted brownies right there inside the dryer. It's a funny story, sure, but it actually perfectly highlights a much deeper truth. All joking aside, that brownie story perfectly captures the messy, unpredictable reality of human life. We do things that don't make logical sense, and this sharply contrasts with the reality of the algorithmic credit system. The current system unforgivingly tracks our behavior over time and expects perfect stability. Even more concerning, negative marks can stay on a credit report for years. The system holds on to past mistakes far, far longer than it recognizes immediate positive improvements. It fundamentally prioritizes cold predictability over any actual human context or capacity for change. So, how do we fix it? Neil points out a really profound truth about human and institutional behavior. People and systems only change when the benefit of changing outweighs the benefit of staying the same. It's kind of like quitting smoking. You only stop when you realize clear lungs are better than the habit. Ultimately, institutions are driven by incentives. These massive credit algorithms are not going to adapt to be more human-friendly until the financial and societal pain of staying the same outweighs the massive profits they're currently generating. They literally have to feel the need to change. Which brings us to our final takeaway. As J.S. Whaldo pointed out, we're dealing with a system that doesn't just measure us. It manages our lives, our housing, and our opportunities, all without truly understanding our humanity. So instead of just blindly asking, how do I play the game better to get a higher credit score, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Why are we allowing the game to be built this way to begin with? Think about that the next time a single number dictates your financial future.